everyone, and welcome to Ecology. This is our second lesson. Remember, in the first lesson we looked at definition of terms. I am very sure that our students are able to define all the necessary terms in ecology by now. So today we are going to look at components of an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is majorly made up of two main components. We have the biotic component, which involves the living organisms in an ecosystem, and then it also involves the abiotic component, which is a composition of the non-living components. For example, light, temperature, water, and the others. And this of course have an impact. They contribute to the survival of the living things. So we shall be, in this lesson, we shall expound more on the living and the non-living component of the ecosystem. So when you look at the living components of the ecosystem, we are looking at the 5 kingdoms of living things: the plants, the animals, the bacteria, the fungi, and the members of kingdom Protoctista. Those constitute the living things, or the biotic component of the ecosystem. And then when you look at the abiotic components, we are looking at the non-living things. For example, water, soil, air, minerals, light, and so on. These ones also play a role in supporting the survival of the living things. So shortly we shall be looking at much more details about this biotic and abiotic components. So you can see there the abiotic components and then also the biotic components. So we want to start with the abiotic component of the ecosystem. This is basically the non-living component of the ecosystem. And you know that the living organisms interact with the non-living components in their community to form a self-sustaining unit called the ecosystem. You remember we defined the ecosystem earlier. Remember the abiotic components of the ecosystem include the soil factors, the soil and the atmospheric factors. And we are going to look at those soil and atmospheric factors. They are called the Adaphic factors. So what are the Adaphic factors of an ecosystem? These are basically physical and chemical factors in the soil and the atmosphere that influence the life and activities of living things. So these are basically non-living things, the non-living components, but their presence affects the survival of the living organisms, either directly or indirectly. And they include the following. So we are going to look at the Adaphic factors of an ecosystem and how each one of them affects the living organisms. To begin with, we have light intensity. You know very well that light comes from the sun. That is a major source of light for living organisms. And light intensity, the amount of light reaching the organisms, has an impact on the process of photosynthesis. You know that photosynthesis is a process by which living organisms make their own food using light energy and then inorganic compounds. So photosynthesis would not be there if there was no light. Also visibility, the ability of organisms to see. Organisms, the predators to see the prey, and then the prey to see the predators. Organisms to be able to see and spot the mates. So visibility is very important, whether in air, in terrestrial habitats, and even in aquatic habitats. So light is important for the process of visibility. Also, light is important for the process of phototropism. You remember the growth responses by plants. The tendency of plants to grow towards light is called phototropism. We shall look at this in ecology. So, and many other important activities in organisms that are supported by light. So light is a very important Adaphic factor. The other one is temperature. You know very well that temperature affects the rate of enzyme activity. That the rate of enzyme activity increases with increase in what? Temperature, until the optimum is reached. So the presence of optimum temperature, or temperature in general, has an impact on how organisms are active in the ecosystem. And then it also has an impact on germination. You know, temperature is one of the factors affecting germination. So temperature is another very important Adaphic what? Factor. So far we have looked at two Adaphic factors, light intensity, and then we have also looked at what? Temperature. The other one is water. Remember that water is used, and it's a major component of the protoplasm of cells. The fluid part of the cell is largely made up of water. It's also a raw material for photosynthesis. We had already mentioned photosynthesis earlier. It aids dispersal of seeds. You know, there are some seeds that are dispersed by water. And then it's also an agent of pollination, especially the pollen grains absorb water before they develop the pollen tube. And then water is also a habitat for many organisms. Those organisms that are called the aquatic or marine organisms live in water. And then water is also used in the process of germination. So generally, water is life, if I may say. So organisms require water for many purposes, and it's a very important non-living component of the ecosystem, but contributes to life. The other one is humidity, the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. And we know very well that humidity affects the process of transpiration. You know that the higher the humidity, the lower the transpiration rate. And the lower the humidity, the higher the rate of what? Transpiration. The other one is pH, the alkalinity or acidity of the soil. You know that pH affects the process of dissolution of mineral elements in the water, and also therefore consequently affecting the growth of plants and microbes in a given habitat. So the pH, you have heard of some soil, the pH favors growth of fruits. In other soils, the pH favors growth of legumes or cereals. So pH is very important for the survival of what? Organisms, and it's a very important Adaphic what? Factor. The other factor is nutrients. The presence or absence of nutrients, or a particular nutrient in the soil, determines the type of organisms which can grow in that soil. Of course, we know some of the important nutrients include nitrates, for example, in the soil. We know phosphates and sulfates are very important for organisms, for the growth of the organisms. Absence or presence of this affects the growth, either positively or negatively. And then we have oxygen concentration. We know very well that oxygen is used in the process of aerobic what? Respiration. And oxygen, of course, is in the atmosphere. And any process that requires energy in the organisms is affected by oxygen concentration. In simple terms, any process that requires energy is affected by oxygen concentration. Because oxygen is required in the process of respiration to produce what? Energy. So, members, want to remind you of our Adaphic factors: oxygen concentration, nutrients, pH, humidity, water, temperature, and the light what? Intensity. So I want to thank you for listening to me, and I request that you subscribe to my YouTube channel for more explanation of all the biological topics. Thank you, and stay safe.